Well, I had to make this one happen, didn't I? Tommy Kendall, my business partner with Jason Jacobson in Talk Media Group, and truly one of the best humans that I know, but for many reasons. Obviously, his race record is outstanding. Just think, while he was back in college, he cleaned up in the IMSA GTU category, winning the championship twice. Then into SCCA Trans Am, where he became part of the folklore of that great American racing series during the 90s, scoring 4 championships. NASCAR came calling, and he really showed great promise, especially on the road courses, and for sure a long and profitable career was on the horizon. But then came that life-changing crash at Watkins Glen in 1991, which left his legs shattered. TK made a stoic recovery and would race again to great success, but in many ways the momentum was lost. Experienced a kind of rebirth, a more rounded man found his niche in front of the TV cameras, and TK quickly became a fan favorite. He just called things the way he saw them, and people enjoyed that. Now, it goes without saying, of course, that the highlight of his career was starting the talk show with Jason and myself. But in all seriousness, getting to know the new and improved, mature Tommy Kendall has been one of the delights of my adult life. He is a gracious, generous, intelligent man that brings insight to any subject. Proving that life has many phases, TK is embracing his latest, and I am very proud to call him my friend. I hope you enjoy the conversation. That is sweet.
Silence.
I feel like we should open this with hello. Welcome to the talk show presented by Mission. I'm Justin Bell and he's Tommy Kendall.
Yeah.
That's what I think we should open with, but it's not that show.
Yeah.
You are a legend, TK. That's why I thought I'd get you on. Also, you're local, so you're local and cheap.
Legend, local,
cheap.
Loquacious. Is there an L word for cheap?
No, not really, but just available is, I think, what it is. It is, because I had people writing in and saying, "Oh, you should do. Why aren't you doing Tommy? Why aren't you doing Tommy?" And then I was talking to Marshall Pruitt not that long ago, and he said you had hosted him on his 1000th show or 500th show. You interviewed him
not on Marshall's, on Cars Yeah.
Cars Yeah. Sorry,
yes,
you did theirs, didn't
yes,
you? You interviewed them, which is kind of funny. Yeah, Mark.
I'd already thought of that. At some point, I need to interview you for this.
That's true, actually.
Yes.
Today is all about you. Now, I mean, it's weird when you get, part of the genesis of this whole show is that, I have access to all these amazing people and I want to talk to them and everything. But the other side of it is you also get a little blasé about who is around you. Yeah. And we're surrounded by all these amazing people that we're just our friends. And it's only sometimes when a fan will stand there, you go, "Oh, actually, yeah, he is quite important." Or, people bring up pictures from the past and you go, "Oh, he really was something." And like we say in the open, it's.
And let's face it, I mean, some are leaving us after long, full lives, but there's no guarantees anymore. So, while you got the chance to these, like, how much would you like to sit down with Sterling? Obviously.
I know. I mean, it is, it's funny when it was like Stephanie had some people, they go, "So what do you know about my health that I don't know?" Because, I'm definitely promoting this as getting the oldies in first, but it's not, it's not just the oldies, because, I mean, like when I did Patrick Long, he's a legend for his era of Porsche drivers. So anyway, here you are. Did you enjoy the Grand Prix?
I enjoyed the atmosphere. I was home.
Yeah.
I didn't actually set foot inside the circuit. I was at the Concourse Club and was at the the Pirelli pop-up store. They had an event.
Yeah.
And Sergio Perez was signing autographs and Gunther Steiner, and when he walked in, I had I knew about the Netflix effect, but it was confirmed. Like, there was this group of young guys and girls dressed to the nines with the blazers and the glasses, and I wouldn't have pegged as car people at all. And they were just buzzing when Gunther walked in. There's Gunther.
And he's a guy that probably languished in a relative obscurity his entire life. I mean, despite running the Formula One, you don't. Even Christian Horner this, and people, they're not famous. They're famous in the racing circuit, but no street cred.
Well, I didn't realize. I knew it was a big show. I think it's the #1 Netflix TV show. So it's not just big for racing. It's big period. The number one.
And they just announced
season
5, 6. I think. I mean, unbelievable. Even if, like, Verstappen gets pissed at it and doesn't want anything to do with it, at times everybody knows it's floated their boats. I didn't go to Miami. I didn't know if I told you. I thought I was going to hope 2 things almost happened. One was the Aston Martin thing I told you about, to drive people around the track, which would have been amazing. And that didn't happen. And then the second was an agency. Through LinkedIn, I saw a message. Can you contact me? Organizing a Ferrari event on the Friday night with the drivers. We need an MC.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know when they go...
I know who they got for that.
Who did they get for it?
They got one partner, Paul Girard.
Yeah, they said we're not going to do what the big ticket, the celebrity version of it with me. They said we're going to go a different route. Oh, great, thanks. Yeah. But it wasn't about the money. Just to go there and be a part of it and have a ticket.
Did you see Willie? Chuck.
Hey baby, hey Chuck. I mean, when Willie, anyone watching this, eventually I will get to Willie T. Rebs. But the nervousness of anyone that knows Willie T. Rebs, when he steps up on national TV with a microphone, you're like, this could be the shortest moment in history.
Yeah, he
did well.
He's a full-blown, obviously, ambassador post-race and so forth. So, and it's funny, he is his own flavor.
Oh yeah.
And so I run into some people who are like, why the hell do they have Willie T doing it? And then people like you and I are like, thank God Willie T's doing it. So no, it's he's not for everyone, but I told Willie, I said, if you were 25 today, I said you would be the biggest star there is, because he's been like an Ali his whole career basically, and there was just no spotlight. There was just no. It was
I know,
our own little world outside of which it didn't get.
It's great. We actually could go back to him in a minute, but you look at that whole hysteria about Formula One. Every asset at Miami was used up. Everyone activated.
Yeah.
I mean, it made you and I probably feel pretty unwanted when everybody was there. I mean, they went way down the list, and we weren't on any of those lists, which just is kind of frustrating. But they went way down the list. I mean, Acura got people and this, and I'm going, they had influencers who have 3,000 followers that were there as well as obviously the David Beckhams and things like that. But I got to say, I enjoyed the pre-show. Watching the pre-show on TV was as good as.
I didn't see that actually. Being Mother's Day, I didn't. I think they still have it on the TV. I ended up watching it on my brother's iPad later.
Okay,
and we didn't through the F1 app, and we didn't catch that. So.
No, it was good. I mean, that's why my mother lives in South Africa, so we don't have Mother's Day on the day of the Miami Grand Prix. It's way easier. But it is interesting, right? When you think about how your own career, and then you think about the careers of people now, if you tick the boxes with the public interest in motorsports, in Formula One, you've got to believe that there's the next American drivers. The American drivers got to be lining up. I know they got talked to Colton, but it's always never come off, has it?
Well, it's funny. Bernie wanted the U.S. market, and he admitted part way in, I don't get it, and I'm never going to get it. I don't know why. It's different than any other market, and I can't crack it. And so he kind of just gave up. Now they've cracked it now to a good degree, and so it'll probably energize the rest of the world, because they were kind of they sort of they weren't foundering, but they were they weren't exactly on a
Yeah.
sharp trajectory either. And so, there's just so many things vying for our attention, and they're no different. So, Liberty's looking like a genius. And it's funny because the F1 drivers, for the longest time, were the highest paid athletes in the world. Now you see some of the NFL contracts and so forth, and and it's all tied to just the power of the U.S. market. And now that they're going to tap into that, those guys could make, because of their strength everywhere else, Asia, South America, Middle East. NFL doesn't have Middle East.
No.
They've got some fans around the world, but nothing like Formula One. So.
Did you, when you think about the schedule they're proposing, imagine if they went to 30 races. There's no one inside Formula One that thinks that's a good idea, other than the people that own the restaurant, which is Liberty.
Yeah.
To drive, those mechanics are on the road. Non-stop. The lifestyle commitment is.
Yeah.
You can say they get paid tens of millions of dollars. Mechanics don't get paid tens of millions.
Well, that's something will have to give in that regard, and they'll have to. NASCAR has been running 38 races for a while, and they were talking about, well, could we go to more, and could we have East Coast and West Coast, or if the money's right, you can strip out some of the stuff that doesn't add value, and you could go to 2-day weekends maybe or something, or you could have 2 sets of crews. Obviously, the engineering staff.
NASCAR don't they?
Well,
road crew and home.
They have home and road, which F1 has also. But in terms of reducing the wear and tear on engineering staff, and they'll figure that out if the market's there, and the money. Pretty soon you'll have guys that are making double, and people will do
whatever they can.
Yeah.
When we were racing, there was no social media, so that was the TV packages were good though. That's what did it for you, I think. But then you look at like Dad and Jack Hicks and those guys, and then back to Sterling and back to all. There was no social media. Mm-hmm. So when I was thinking about it, like even we saw Paris Hilton on the grid. Paris Hilton was famous before social media. If you think about it, that's how famous Amanda de Cadenet back in the day was back in England, Alan's daughter. To be famous as an athlete, or like you look at Muhammad Ali or you look at Elvis Presley, they were globally the most famous people in the world through print and radio and TV. Think about that.
Yeah. Well, it's just different ways, and so way more people are famous now, but not as many are. Well, it's harder to break through the clutter. If you were there were only so many things. You had the major sports leagues, and you had heavyweight boxing, and so if you set a land speed record, you could be catapulted because there was only 3 TV channels and newspapers, and so if you could get through to those, you were big. And now there's kind of a thriving middle, and like in the race driver market, I make more than especially in today's dollars, more than almost anybody in sports car. But there are 10 times the number of drivers making a living now.
Yeah. And
so, it was literally 5 guys here and 10 or 15 there. And now there's several hundred that are making it, getting by, or doing pretty well between coaching. It's just a different world. But then you look at the ones now, the power of social and streaming and direct to consumer and all that, Kardashians and Paris harnessed the power of reality TV before social. So it's a good time. And it's funny, one of my favorite sayings when people slag, whether it's the Kardashians or Paris back in the day, I said the market's never wrong. And everybody swears they don't watch the Kardashians. Well, everybody's obviously watching the Kardashians, or almost everybody, or a lot. Yeah. And so the market's never wrong. So I love looking at those and understanding, even if it's not my flavor, what is it about them that's resonating, on what level. And there's a bunch of different ways to do it. It can be drama, it can be compelling authenticity and insight. It could be a whole bunch of different ways to do it. And you can't just mimic it, but if understanding how it all works is helpful.
it must be pretty good to be Lando Norris or George Russell or, I mean,
Charles
Leclerc. I mean,
Yeah.
they're so, we look at them, it's like we even look at Max and go, oh, you know, he's now been doing it for how many seasons? 6, 7, 5?
5 or 6, yeah.
I mean, that's a couple of hundred Grand Prix probably, and we look at it and go, what? You know, he's been around a long time, but he's still a kid.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's like top 6 in podiums.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so everyone, you know, I was thinking about it as you were just talking then, everyone always thinks about you and talks about you who's worked with you or knows you and as being, you know, you're a thinker's driver, you're a very strategic and you're very intellectual about that. But I was just thinking back to the Tommy that was on track and was a fearsome competitor. How did you separate those two things? Because you can't always be the thinking driver, right? You've got to be a guttural driver too and go for it. What was your mix? What did you bring that was special, do you think?
Well, there was an evolution, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
Early in my career, I was governed. My dad was super risk averse and methodical, and don't crash and so that was sort of how I got into it. And I had a lot of natural speed in the Russell cars, and I was always fast in everything. But you run up against, you get moving up through the levels, and pretty soon you're going to find a place where you're not the fastest guy. And so the analysis is what moved me up. But I remember when I kind of switched from championship mode to race win attack mode. It was kind of, I would say, in early Roush days, and there's a little bit of like pissed off because a lot of us are fueled by anger and to some degree. It's hard to do something that is really not smart to do, like take these risks without some way to A, block it, and B, something fueling you. And so I remember seeing like Willie T, he was, a lot of situations he'd join mid-season or he'd have trouble early, and he was out of the championship and he was just gassing it up every single race. I'm like, I said, I love my championships and that's what pays the bills and that's what's made my career. But I said, I want to, and so I started really trying to do both more. I was really, rather than just stack up points for the championship, I said, I want to win races. And that happened during the Roush years, and obviously, if you win a bunch of races early, you're also gonna be in good shape for the championship. So and so it was an evolution, and hearing some of the criticism, he's super fast, but he's not great racecraft, and that stuff, you're like, it stings, but you're like, there's a kernel of truth to that, and so you're trying, how can I round out my game, and so the part I really prided myself on pure speed. So in every series I ever ran for the full season, there's only 1 year I didn't have the most poles of everything. Even GTP, out for half the year, I had more poles in 91 than anyone else in the series. And so I always really prided myself, because that was kind of the purest form of all things for one lap, who's the fastest here. And it also plays into the race, because you're theoretically the only one who controls your own destiny. If you can maintain that, you're the only one that can run the table, so to speak. Has it in their, control their own destiny.
What point was it that because when you're on the way up, especially when you started, there's a difference to that to now, when I think young kids are starting in karting, they know they want to be Lewis, or they know they want to be Danica. They don't know, there's for them and their parents, there is no option. That's it. Even though there's tens of thousands of them trying now for a few jobs. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you did it. You didn't know it was going to be your life. You didn't know you were going to make a living at it, right? Someone was going to stroke you a check for driving a car. There was still an innocence to all of us when we started. That
I literally didn't know there was such a thing. Okay. You were raised with a professional, and so I remember when I went to my first race with my dad, and when he bought a car and another guy drove it at Sears Point in 1980. I mean, my life changed, because, again, 3 channels, a couple magazines, 2 races a year were on TV. I think, Indy tape delayed and Monaco was on Wide World of Sports, sometimes Daytona. And so if it didn't happen to someone you knew, it didn't exist, literally.
Yeah.
Not in my consciousness. So when I went to that race, I'm like, oh my God, this is it. And my dad saw the look in my eyes, and he's like, you can't make a living at this. This is not a career. This is not a job. So we're going to do this for fun as much as we can. As long as you get good grades in high school and go to college and get good grades, I will help you. And so, but in my mind, I'm like, that's all I can think about. That's all I can think. So it really helped me focus in school. So
I bet.
Because that was my sponsorship, and so it was good advice on my dad's part, because it's really threading a needle to make a living, especially in sports cars. And but when I got my first paychecks from racing, I was like, oh my God! It was I actually had a paid deal in Mazda Pro in Russell. There was this one team, a guy, Ken Twaits, who's now coming back in Trans Am, got on with this guy. Actually, it wasn't him; it was another guy that brought the money in, and he got pushed out. Now that I recall that, he was at a car wash with a guy from Harvey's Casino in Lake Tahoe, and they came in and they funded. It was a 2-car team. They added me. I was a third car. It was Ken Twaits, Jeff Krosnoff, myself, and we each got paid $100 a day. So 3-day weekend was $300. Test day and appearance day, whatever. Yeah. And so I was like, oh my God, this is the best. And then prize money in my GTU championship season. That first year was prize money only, and then the next year I got $1,000 a race. And I remember I used to have this. I used to just write out. And a cut of the money, and so I'd write out $1,000, and I'd do 25% of this, and I remember keeping track of and making money. It was awesome.
It was also an era when American sports car racing was coming on the rev limit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, amazing European drivers. My dad was over here. You had big names. I know you were at that point with the Trans Am and things that wasn't exposed to those guys, but it was suddenly the place to race. I remember when Dad in the mid-80s, he was off. He was here before we knew it.
I didn't have the perspective on what it was like in Europe, since it was bigger there or been bigger longer. I just assumed it was bigger. But if I think about it, the number of Europeans that were here, and now you hear them, even the factory Porsche guys are like, oh, the U.S. Assignment's the best. And so, but you had John Bishop and with IMSA and Camel, R.J. Reynolds, those two together, I think really, and then when it went from wealthy guys and drug dealers,
the good old days,
to manufacturers. The first Porsche was always around, but I remember when Nissan and Ford got into the GT, Ford and Chevy and the GTs. When you have factories there, it's a whole other story. And there was also tire companies. You had Goodyear was the mainstay, but you had Firestone trying, and you had Bridgestone trying. And so that's when the money starts coming.
Dads are a funny thing. When you just think about what you said about your dad saying he could make a living in it. Well, then my dad was the opposite, because he was like, you can't make a living in it. as in totally different emphasis on the words. He just didn't, we'll talk about this when you interview me. He knew everything there was to know about the sport from his perspective. So when his son said he wanted to do it, it wasn't the greatest day of his life. I mean, I know there's a lot of drivers that like their kids to do it. He wasn't over the moon. Gave me a lot of support. Evolved. I think I never answered the question for him, even when I won Le Mans and stuff, that this was a good idea. I just don't think that ever still answered it until I did TV. Then I think he thought I was on the right track. What was it like though for your dad, who knew nothing about the professional side of it? Because I do think about this with other athletes. When they make it, is there a moment when your dad goes, actually, this was, we did all right, son, or you're great? I mean, when was his turning point? Well,
it's funny because my dad was a professional athlete, played for UCLA, and then played, walked on, didn't get drafted, but for the Houston Oilers, won AFC Championship his first year. and then that was like a part-time job then, because his contract was $8,500, and I think the highest paid guy in the league was the Heisman Trophy winner was 30, and so off season everybody had to have jobs, and so his was real estate. And it's funny, when I was playing football in grade school, he was always trying to talk all of us out of it, and he wanted to make sure we weren't doing it to please him. And of course, on some level, we were a little bit. We wanted to be like Dad, but rather than being the dad that pushed you and was trying to live through you, he was the exact opposite. So he was wanting to make sure you really wanted to do it. That said, he'd say, if you're going to do something, you owe it to yourself to give it up everything and immerse yourself, figure out everything you can, and be in shape, all those things. And so in racing, I wouldn't be here if he wasn't racing and he didn't give me the start and help me with the early sponsorship. I threaded the needle into a factory ride quickly and younger than most people do. And there was just kind of a quiet, he was proud from early on,
Good.
And he saw how fast I was. He was sort of a hobbyist, and he won some races. Back then it was good team and good co-drivers and not effing up. He won Sebring. He won with Dennis Ossie. I think he won probably maybe 5 IMSA races, GTO, but was never super quick or even very quick at all. I mean, there were some times where he
got on it.
Yeah.
So, but he must. Yeah. So he was just happy that when you made it, he realized that he obviously early on realized you had some greatness to you. But I guess him knowing how to be a professional athlete is the message he gave you.
Well, and just
training
his approach. My dad is the most disciplined guy
to this day, right?
To this day that you've ever met.
Yeah.
Nothing seems to come very easily for him. You watch him snow skiing or playing golf, and when he did, and so forth, and he outworked everyone in business, and just discipline. And so I was in racing, I was uber focused for the first 5 or 6 years. When I was going to UCLA, I didn't drink, I didn't party, I ate like a maniac. Every morning I had oat bran, wheat toast, no butter, egg whites, and I was just a machine, and I learned a lot of that.
To get to racing.
Just
to be the best you could
fitness,
be.
I was one of the early people that was really into the fitness side of it. Yeah. And I tried to not show that because I didn't want everyone to know. I knew it was a huge advantage, but I wouldn't want people to see how hard I trained, like everybody wants everyone to know how hard they're training. I didn't want anyone to know how hard I was training because I thought it was an advantage. We had a neighbor that was an Olympic cyclist, and he was the guy that brought physical training to Supercross. Honda hired him, Jeff Spencer, and he happened to live in the neighbor's guest house, and so I glommed onto him and some of his approaches and how to get better. But that all came from my dad. If you're gonna do it, go all the way.
So as you look back now, what is the? I mean, we'll talk about the accidents in a minute, but all those Trans Am victories and everything. Someone says, what was the best moment? Like mine was going to Le Mans with Dad, right? Because there wasn't a huge amount to choose from. But for you were winning the same kind of races weekend after weekend against the same people. And you've told me that you were never very satisfied. You stood on the podium, not really appreciating the moment. So 2 things. When you look back, what was your heyday? And did you even realize it at the time it was the heyday?
I mean, post-accident, I had a greater appreciation for it. Yeah. But I was still so results-oriented that was the one thing, and I see it all on the people's faces now, they're literally already thinking about the next one, And so in 97, where we got on that win streak, I knew on some level, and I really said, listen, I appreciated it while it was happening. Not as much as after, but I did know that was special. Some of the one-off stuff, to my career was so interesting the way, even though I only did 14 NASCAR races, for Rick Hendrick, I spent a lot of time with Dale Sr. overseeing my 1990 program. just all these wild, Paul Newman,
Yeah.
running with Newman at Daytona, some of these one-off things are just, it's like Forrest Gump. I'm like, how is this even
How can that
happening?
happen?
Yeah.
So you can relate to talking about Paul Newman to what Patrick Long was saying about doing Le Mans with Patrick Dempsey when it recalibrated everything he knows about fame and being in the public eye, because they went mad. It was the same for you, right? When Newman was racing.
Yeah, I mean, I was around it racing against him in Trans Am, but then in '95 running at Daytona, he was, now mind you, he was 70 years old, and Paramount, it was Nobody's Fool was on the car, and so he had been famous for a long time and knew how to manage it and so forth, but it was wild seeing, it's hard enough waking up in the middle of the night, rushing down to the car at Daytona and getting your eyes adjusted to the the headlights and so forth without having 50 photographers flashes going off in your face. And and he started racing at age 47. B, he was 70 years old. C, he had to learn under this white hot spotlight, and so what he accomplished was remarkable no matter what.
Do you think he was the best one?
I think,
of the celebrities.
Yeah, I would say.
He was certainly quicker than McQueen, right?
Yeah, and again, started at age 47.
Yeah.
Won Trans Am races on his own, not with co-drivers. So just one of the more competitive people I've ever been around, whether it's shooting pool, go-karting, he loved badminton. I mean, he was just fierce, he did this Versa climber with Stan Barrett, who was his, the land speed record holder, but was also his stunt double along with Brockman. They competed at everything: chin-ups, planks, sit-ups, Versa climber. He was just, I guess like a lot of us,
What was he like though in those moments, the quiet moments in between? It's like I asked Dad when we did this. You went for dinner with Enzo. Okay, so what knife and fork did he? I mean, did he drink red wine or white wine? Did he smoke? Did he? You were the only one that did that. Everyone knows what he's like when he walked through the factory. Yeah. You had so many dinners with him. You spent, you changed to go and do battle in a race car in the same trailer, right? Very intimate moments. What was he like in those moments?
Well, he used to speak almost in riddles. They were almost like, dramatic movie lines. It's like he thought that way. And he'd say some things and I'd be like, what is he talking about? And then only years later you would figure out what he meant. He was delivering some wisdom to you and he wasn't forcing it on you and so forth. He was, one I remember was relative to Caroline when we were split up.
Yeah.
And he told me that he and Joanne were separated at one point, and I've never heard that before. And he said it was earlier, and they were both on the same. I think it was the Paramount lot. They were both on the same lot doing projects, and he saw her across the lot, and so he was recounting this to me, and he said to himself, he said, "Are you just going to let her walk out of your life?" And that's all he said. And he was giving me some advice.
He was.
And then another thing he said that was sort of, I didn't know what he was talking about at the time when he said, he said, "I love the grace of racing." What does that mean?
Yeah.
And so I was so analytical. There was the art side of things I was kind of blocked from me. I was so, I don't know,
almost the beauty of racing.
Right or left brain. And he said it's the only thing I've ever felt graceful at. And then now that's the one thing that I enjoy the most when I'm giving rides to someone. You've got the car balanced, and it's 5 more pounds on the right front or 5 more on the right rear is the difference between the front sliding and the rear sliding. And so the art of the driving is something I had no appreciation for because I was just pure analytic for a long time.
Yeah, maybe having someone like him around that had a different objective to it, that did it for that pure passion. He didn't need to do it for any other reason. There wasn't going to make any more money, was it? It was just that. I think that's what is, even now, some of the friends we have out at Thermal and places like that, they're doing it at 50 because they freaking love it.
Yeah.
They work their whole lives to be able to afford it. I think we all came at it from a different perspective. Did he? Was he funny?
Oh yeah, very funny.
Was
Super dry, super dry.
Yeah.
You know, but little things like he took pride in being on Nixon's, enemies list.
Okay,
And so, and then, he'd joke about the camps and the food company and saying, if I'd known they were going to be that successful, I wouldn't have given it all away, which is not true. But he was just very self-deprecating, and quiet. Didn't need to be the center of attention, but also understood his place and how special he could make people feel. And so he'd go out of his way a little bit to make people feel a little special, because he knew that they would literally never forget that for the rest of their lives. And you hear lots of those stories from people, and it was literally one exchange, and the person remembers it to this day, and it made him feel like 10 feet tall. So and the fame, we were riding to the Miami Grand Prix after we'd won Daytona, and we were in Miami going to that old waterfront track,
Bayside,
and we were at a stoplight for 5 seconds, and the people on the sidewalk recognized me in a car, and instantly everywhere he went, like I had my own little bits of fame in a small world, and everywhere else totally anonymous. He couldn't turn his off. And so I said to him, I said, does that get old? And he says, in my business, you got to worry when that stops happening, when they stop caring. And it wasn't 5 minutes later, we got to where we were going, and we were trying to get in somewhere we didn't have the right pass. And he says, 1 second, opens the door, gets up, takes his glasses off. He says, where should we park? And they're like, right in here. And he gets in and he goes, it's not all bad.
What was your last conversation with him? The last one you ever had?
I didn't see him at the end. It was, I don't remember the exact last one, but whenever we were at races, he was, as much as he loved driving, he got as much satisfaction at being part of Newman Haas. And he was as in awe of Mario as everyone is of him. And so he had a mega appreciation for the people that were really good at what he loved to do. And so he tells a story of when Carl Haas said, hey, do you want to be an owner with me? And he's like, no. He says, I've got Mario Andretti. He says, let's do it.
Wow. His name was ringing around in my mind recently, Paul Newman's, because I read, it was an older biography of Steve McQueen, but I just was reading it, picked it up, and it was really good. But it was also talking a lot about the politics of being in Hollywood, and you had all these big stars. I mean, and the one that really he would get to McQueen was like a Newman and James Garner and all they were all trying to do the same thing. I had no idea of like going for the Magnificent Seven, who got roles, who didn't, the roles that they might have been in. But the Newman name came up a lot for Steve McQueen, because and then when he started racing, but when James Garner did form the Grand Prix, it fused Steve's brain totally that he could be doing that. But it must have been you forget that actors have to work just as hard as we do to hustle. That's why they have big managers, right? They have to really position themselves.
Well, they're one of the other things he shared with me, and I don't know if I was venting about the challenge of my program maybe or something, but he says in Hollywood, I call it, they beat you up with your passion. And basically he was saying, if they know you want to do the project, he says there's no budget, and so he, I think, almost always, he did very, very well, I think, but he almost always put his passion over the other stuff. But he wasn't immune. He knew what was going on, and he obviously was making a conscious decision. But another story that he shared, when I flew with him on his plane to watch Michael debut the Swift at Homestead, and he was doing a movie in LA. He had a house in Malibu, the studio rented for him on the beach, and he said he said you can use it anytime, and I never
You
did.
never did?
I went out and had dinner with he and Joanne, out there once. And
It's a good job he didn't offer me that.
I know.
I'd still be there.
Today I'd still be there. So, but at that dinner, he asked if I wanted to go to Miami with him, and at first I said no, and he said, "We're taking my plane. We're going to go Saturday, back Sunday night." And I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah.
So, and they won, and he was so excited. I mean, like over the moon. And so we're flying back, and with the headwind, we had to make a stop for fuel, and the pilot said, "Where do you want to stop, Paul?" And he says, "I don't care as long as they have a Texaco station." That's weird. And then I'm pretty sure he had a magic Texaco card where the bill never came to him, even for jet fuel. And so I don't know that, but I think, so we stopped at this little place in Texas, and he goes, "You know what we're going to do?" He says, "Whenever Joanne and I land a new part," to your point about how hard it was, he says, "we would always go get some champagne, and we get some caviar, and we would drive up the coast, and we would celebrate and have a little picnic by the side of the road." And so he says, "That's what we're going to do when we land. We're going to find some champagne and caviar." It was 10 o'clock at the middle of nowhere, Texas. And we spent some time calling ahead and on the ground trying to find it. And I think we ended up with either nachos or quesadillas and Budweiser instead.
Hence your lifelong passion for Budweiser.
It's true.
Maybe.
Paul Newman and Dale Sr. both drank Bud.
Okay.
And so if anyone gives me grief about Bud, if people give me grief about Crocs, I say Dan Gurney wore Crocs.
Yeah.
If people give me grief about Bud, I say Paul Newman and Dale Earnhardt. If you're gonna crap on me, you're gonna be crapping on them. So,
So, did you part of doing this Life with Legends has made me think of, God, the people I wanted to have conversations with that I never had conversations with. God, the people I was with that I never spoke to enough. All the way back to my grandfather, who's in World War II on a North Sea convoy. I was 17 when he died. We never talked about it. It's the same with our racing world, though. We've all lost people throughout the journey that, God, I wish I'd spent more time with. The only one, as you said, Sterling Moss, I did spend a lot of time talking to. But I still never said to him, well, I think I did once, when Fangio was in the drivers' meeting, or you looked around the drivers' meeting, who did you think was going to be the guy that day? I've asked everyone else that question, but I never really asked Sterling that. It would have been, quite interesting to have had that perspective. Who, for you, I guess it's different phases up to the accident, but ultimate self-belief is the mark of true successful athletes, right? Or anybody. But at the same time, a realism of who they have to beat on the day, because you can't just say I'm the best in every way and then get your ass kicked because you didn't plan. Who was the guy for you at the moment you're like, fuck, he was quick, shit, this guy, if he's on today, we're in trouble on a street track or whatever?
It's funny, I only raced head to head with Pruitt a couple years. Pruitt I actually had an edge on him speed wise, but he drove so hard and made so few mistakes and was really the Pruitt fade that Paul Tracy has made famous. I think I planted the seed for what the Pruitt fade was. So he was complete. The guy that Ron Fellows, and it's funny because when I first encountered Ron Fellows, I drove, I think, for John Powell in a Playboy Endurance Series in Canada, and Fellows must have just been starting and was in this, I think he was in the journalist car, and I sort of, kept tabs on people's times, and I basically said, this guy's not that quick. And fast forward, and then when he got into Trans Am, he was good, but he just got better and better and better and better, and
It wasn't like a sparkler going off. It was...
He was the most complete guy I raced against.
Really?
And so blend of speed and all conditions, and so he was the most complete guy, and so he was always the one in the Trans Am days that I most had to contend with.
I bet, yeah. And of course, then 20-year career with Corvette.
Yeah.
He did 15 behind the wheel. Just unbelievable. I'm looking forward to talking to both those guys. Scott, because I can do it at his winery, and and two, whoever goes to Canada anymore, not recently, but get to Ron, because we did have a very brief time together as teammates, in the Corvette. Not my finest hour, but maybe his. No, it is one thing I never realized, even when we started working together doing the talk show. I never realized how young you were when you had the accident.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like shockingly young, really.
Yep.
What was it, 30?
I was 24.
24.
Yeah.
When you had the accident, you were 24?
I was 24, yeah. Yeah.
So you'd really only started stretching your legs.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah. I got started so early. My first IMSA titles I was 19 in '86. And so, 24. And that was basically the halfway point, because I had 5 seasons before and five after, and that one where I was more or less out. So, I mean, I forget how young I
totally.
was. Yeah.
I mean, you were not fortunate. Your resilience and your skill allowed you to have a successful career post. But what did it derail the most by having that accident?
It definitely, I guess, probably my NASCAR and IndyCar stuff.
Okay. Because NASCAR were hot for you at that moment, weren't they?
They were. There was a guy there, Chip Williams, who was part of the inner circle, and he was head of PR. And he used to say to me, he'd say, "You got to come south. You got to come south." And I'd say, "What?" He says, "You'd be the biggest star. You'd be the biggest star there is." I said, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" And I didn't realize he didn't really fill in too many blanks for me. They were looking for the guy to take them out of the regional southeast, grubby short track, gritty, not grubby, gritty. And so my accident, and then 92, Jeff Gordon came along. And so
filled the role pretty
I
nicely.
think, what they were saying is, we're looking for the guy that we can tell the world about, and you're gonna have the biggest megaphone and the biggest spotlight. If you come here and do what you've done here over there, he says, you're gonna be on the launch pad. And so
and size not a factor.
No,
there?
size not a factor. Now, I did come close over there, because when I came back from my accident, I mean, it was hot both IndyCar and, because Chevy was the dominant engine in IndyCar at that point. I'd had a test, but after my accident, I was already big, and now with the reduced mobility in my ankles, it was even harder to fit. But on the NASCAR side of things, and I'd already made some inroads, obviously, because as the running the road races and almost winning right before my accident at Sears Point. So when I came back, and Chevy was kind of pulling back in prototype, Gurneys, Eagles, and the Jags had leapfrogged us, and so that next year we ran a partial schedule. We weren't that competitive. I think most of the blame in Chevy's eyes was on me, not being as good after the accident, and not understanding that the car was not the world beater that it was the year before. And so the only real thing that was open to me was to drive the 43 and replace Richard Petty, who was ending in 92. And so his last race was Jeff Gordon's first race. But now all of a sudden, instead of coming in on a high, I'm kind of literally limping in. And with a whimper. I had a cane. I was embedded with Petty for about 6 weeks. I lived down there, and I would travel to the races in their van with them, with Dale Inman and those guys. And they were pushing really hard. I tested the car at North Wilkesboro, and Dale Inman couldn't get past the cane and the feet. And he says, "I just don't think you can drive one of these big, heavy cars." And I'm like, I can drive a GTP car that pulls 4 Gs for 2 hours.
Yeah, I can do this.
And so I get it, but that's not, these things pull no G load.
No.
And power steering, I said, it's not an issue. Talk about unanswered prayers, because some part of me knew that was a career killer, because I knew Petty Enterprises had fallen a good ways with Richard. He wasn't competitive, and Rick Wilson was the guy that got that ride, and ended his career, and so I was hoping because I had nothing else going.
And it is a big pot, isn't it? It's the big honey pot.
Yep.
You're like,
Yep.
I remember sitting on a plane. Oh, do you do NASCAR? And I was talking about racing, and a couple next to me, and they said, do you do NASCAR? And I go, if I was doing NASCAR, I wouldn't be sitting next to you on Southwest. That's the big difference between our sport and their sport.
Yeah, they got a lot going on right now, and they're trying everything they can, and there's some great young talent, but it's funny. It's, as you said earlier, there's so many options, so much sport, so much news, so much fun stuff to digest. None of this is as important as it was to the people. The fans. There's not as many people in the crowds. You can sit at home and watch it better. I was thinking that about Miami. It's great. My friends paid $6,000 a ticket to go and watch qualifying. Yeah.
And still have to watch it on a monitor, to know what's going on because they were on one part of the track. I'm sitting at home,
right,
getting the best of it, but it's not the same as being there.
No, they play together. NASCAR is a different situation. I think their stage racing and the last tweak to the playoffs, I think, is their new Coca-Cola, and they don't realize it. And it really changed. It kind of neutralized their main reason for being. The championship doesn't necessarily reward the best performance for the year. It has more often than it hasn't, but that's sort of at least half circumstantial. Yeah. And so you can get some really unsatisfying outcomes. And so they did it in the interest of intensity and drama and so forth. Anyways, so I think they've got some other challenges there.
I never had a bad accident. I was very lucky. Never did. Dad never did. Didn't. As Brian Redmond never did, as he said. That's why everyone says then you weren't going fast enough. I mean, Brian Redmond had massive accidents. Yeah. Hurley used to say, everyone used to say I wasn't going quick enough then, if that was the case. Which is probably true, so not necessarily for Dad, but he was just very fortunate to not get hurt. Yeah. What is it like in that instant of when it goes from, you're saving it, because we've all done that. Fuck, shit, balls, and then okay, undo the seatbelts and get out, right? Yeah. That's 99 out of 100 accidents. That's what happens. But you went to the dark side in an instant when it happened. What was going through your mind?
Well, the funny thing is, I had very, very few incidents up until that point in my career. I mean, I had a couple little, and so I'd kind of convinced myself that you can operate at a really high level with huge intensity, and as long as you execute, you can have it both ways. And that the mechanical failure was something I had never factored in, and so that was probably the hardest thing to get over coming back. But in the race, I felt the shutter and the wheel come off. We had just made a stop a couple laps before that, so I thought maybe it was loose wheel, whatever. So immediately correcting, and I'm thinking I'm going to lose second place, and then only after the impact, and when I was backwards, I saw how fast I was still going. And everything was blurred. And I go, wow, I'm going to hit something hard. And then
did you manage to get hands off?
No, I had my hands because I thought I was going in backwards, but the car came around, and so I never really saw the barrier come. And it got dark as I went into the tires, and then when he just got awful impact, and then it pinwheeled me back, and the whole front of the car was gone, the top of the car was gone. It was just bright daylight, and I came to rest, and I looked down, and I could tell that my right femur was broken because it was kind of wrapped in the steering column. Yeah. And the knee was jammed up into the clevis, and so I tried to move it, and I couldn't, and it felt like there was like a blowtorch on my feet, from the fractures and so forth. So it was a weird pain. It wasn't pure pain. It wasn't sharp. It was just like this. There's so much adrenaline, and I lifted this leg up. I got it free from whatever is there, and literally the whole front of the car is gone. It's just outside right there, and I lifted. So I knew, but it was just burning. So I knew it was, but it looked okayish. and this one was trapped, and so I was just trying to control my breathing, and then when the safety workers got there,
You knew it was serious at that moment.
I knew it was serious, but I didn't. I'm awake,
Yeah.
and
Did you talk on the radio?
I tried.
But it was dead.
Yeah, I said, hey,
Transponder's putting
yeah,
down the road.
I'm like, hey, I've broken my legs. Send the medics.
Okay.
And so I was just trying to keep my, you want to get away from the wreckage, and I was stuck,
Yeah.
and so I'm waiting, and safety workers get there, and they don't see accidents like that very often, so they're rattled, which makes you a little rattled. It's like, okay, well, and they couldn't figure out how to get me out, this leg
Yeah,
out, and so I oversaw that because my knees were jammed into the bolts that they had to undo. So I said, you're gonna have to cut, and so I kind of oversaw
Yeah.
my extraction, and they didn't want to do it, and I'm like, I'm not getting out of here until you cut that, and so.
So they had to cut what, the bolts?
They had to cut the steering column, which was my leg was up against, because I was in like this, and it came right here, and so when
And then, so you broke your leg around the steering
around,
column.
yeah,
So literally the forces
yeah,
snapped your leg across the steering
yeah,
column.
and I think, and it was jammed up because everything came up, and so that's, I never really thought about how that happened, but that
So
was,
they had to cut that out.
So they had to cut that with the hydraulic cutters against my leg. I think they started an IV while I was in the car, which I think probably helped some, but so all that. So I never lost consciousness.
And you waved to your wife.
So I didn't know how serious it was. I knew, you're always kind of an optimist and so forth. And when they got me, I assumed everyone could see me take my helmet off, talking to everyone. I didn't know the way the car came to rest. You couldn't see anything, and it looked.
And it was like half an hour, wasn't it?
Not survivable.
Of time.
Yeah, pretty close, 35, 40 minutes.
People not knowing if you were, and the TV went quiet.
Yeah.
And they did, and we've done the TV when this has happened, and they're like, well, I'm sure he'll be fine anyway. Let's go back for a race recap.
Yeah. So
Meanwhile,
the reason I waved is so I assumed everyone at home knew I was okay. I said, you got to find my mom. She's here. So tell her I'm okay. But when I got out of the car, when they got me on the stretcher, everyone started applauding. And that's usually when the guy trots off the field after, he sprained his knee or something. And I'm like, I haven't moved a muscle. I'm on the stretcher. So that's why I waved, was to kind of acknowledge the crowd. But that was the first anyone at home knew that I was okay. And so, then I was in the helicopter. He started going into shock. They took me to a local hospital, where you start shakes and some of that stuff. Sayre, Pennsylvania, where they stabilized me, and assessed everything, and then my mom was there, and then people were coming, and they were going to take me to Indy, and they transported me to Indy that night, and that's where the surgeries were done. So,
Were there very dark moments after that?
not really.
Really?
Again, the part of me,
Because some people can fall apart at this point.
with me, it was the same thing that kept me from enjoying it. Also kept me. It was, what's next? All right. What do we do? How do we fix this? What do we do? And it was just, all the focus was on that. I wasn't thinking about racing, to be honest, because I'm like, I don't know what my life's going to be like, and so I was wondering a little bit about that, but I was just focused on, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? And I'm not wired. I probably on some level was, but I was kind of not in touch with my emotions, to be quite honest. And so, everything is just moves at a glacial pace. And so, but I moved to Indy. I was going to therapy like 6-8 hours a day. I literally lived at the physical therapy clinic. On the weekends they were closed, so I'd sit there in my apartment and whatever. But you look backwards, you're like, oh wow, look how far I've come. And then once I, kind of got stabilized and figured out I was going to be somewhat relatively okay, then I started thinking about racing, and I wasn't sure, because the part about being okay with something happening that is out of your control, that was the hardest part. And especially the thing that was open to me was going back into that car. And Jim Miller was the most upstanding guy you could ever, beyond. He came and visited me in the hospital, and he says, whenever you're ready, he says, the car is waiting for you. And that was, he thought Chevy was still all the way in, and Chevy kind of started, they cut way back. And so he said, when it came time, he says, we're going to run a full season. I said, but Chevy, he says, I told you, I made a promise to you.
Wow.
We'll do it. So he was going to dig into his pocket $5 million or whatever.
Just do it.
And I said, Jim, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever done, but you don't have to do that. I said, let's go with as many races as they'll do. And he says, well, if you ever need any help in the future, you let me know,
Wow.
and your ride's here for you. So he's
in your top
yeah.
all-star team there.
Yeah.
What a crazy thing coming back from an accident like that and having that mindset. What was the first car you got in? What was the first pit lane you pulled out of?
First car was thanks to Bob Bondurant, and I'd run into him somewhere. I don't know where, it might have been SEMA. It was somewhere. That would have been before that. So he basically said, when you're ready to drive again, come to the school and hang out and drive as much as you want. And so that was the first. So the course I set out for myself was, I'd seen Pruitt come back, I'd seen AJ Foyt, I'd seen Rick Mears, I'd seen a lot of these guys, and I'm like, I thought a lot of them came back, almost all of them came back too soon, and they weren't the same afterwards. And so I said, I'm not doing, now I know it's more complicated than that, but that was my view from the outside. So I said, I'm not going to do that. And so I said, I'm going to drive the Bondurant cars, I'm going to drive a Trans Am car, and I said, I'm not going to advance until I'm as quick as I was before. And the funny thing was, I was still on crutches when I was as quick in a Trans Am car. And then the first test in the prototype, I was as fast as I was before. And so I used crutches to get to the car in Miami. And so I was the guy I said is coming back too soon, but I had convinced myself that I was ready to go. And then, the only question is, can I go 2 hours? And I could,
Yeah, endurance. It is incredible because it has been proved now, things that hypothetically we thought about, like, what if you'd lost your legs?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've seen some pretty good examples of people that are driving pretty freaking quick, Zanardi and people like that, with hand controls. Mm-hmm. Skills that you have as a driver are not the prerogative of your limbs. You know what I mean? It's yes, it makes it easier, but I believe that you can, if you only had to use your hands and you're a great driver, you can be as good as you're going to be.
Well, a car, let's face it, it's the only sport where you have a huge mechanical assist to begin with. The car, and so you're just doing a little bit more on the interface. You asked about the dark moments. The darker moments came the next year and in the years after, when because I'd always written my own ticket. Once I was with Chevy, they would move mountains to make programs happen and so forth and so on. And so after that year where we weren't as competitive at all, ran a limited schedule, I was looking towards 93. And so everything I pitched to Chevrolet, there was always, like I said, what about Trans Am? And they're like, we've got Buzz McCall there. I'm like, Buzz McCall took over after we left, after we dominated, And I said, I want a pickup truck and a fifth wheel with Binks, and we're gonna run. And they're like, I can't do that. And so it was like being friend zoned, how. And so I saw the writing on the wall. No matter what I pitched, no matter how much it made sense, I'm like, yeah. And so they were gonna, I think, put me out to pasture. They were gonna not drop me, but I was gonna do.
You could just feel it.
I was gonna do appearances and so forth. And I said, I gotta do something. And so the whole time I was with Chevy, Lee Morse from Ford, they were always making overtures. And so I said, listen, I don't like playing one against the other. It probably wasn't a great move, because I probably maybe could have done better, whatever. Yeah. I said, I don't like playing one against the other. I said, if they ever don't make the deal, I said, I'm interested. And he says, well, call us if you ever need something. And so I finally called, and Max Jones was now running Roush. And so I called Max, and they had a new factory GTO program coming with a Mustang, one car. And Mike Dingman was there in a GT, what did they call that? Something, another division between GTS and GTU. He was there, and so it went together, and Jack basically took Max's word. I did one race in Paul Gentilozzi's Oldsmobile, who we raced against the next year, they ran a third car at Lime Rock, and I went and I'd gotten that car, and I was super quick, and I was going to win the race. I made a mistake and slid off and on a drying track, but was really fast, and so that's all Max needed to see. I told Jack, he says, we're fine. So back on, win the championship in 93, but then at the end of 93, the budget was going to be about half next year, and so Max says, you got to find some money, and I was back living in Detroit trying to find money, and my wife said, I don't even recognize you have no confidence, you're like begging, and she said, this isn't you. She says, you can kiss as many asses as you want, and they're not going to hire you. I said, the only thing, if you're the fastest guy like you always were, and that's what will make or break it. And so it was like a reset to get back to, I was still looking for money, but I was not groveling and begging and sort of thing. And so, the Dingman deal helped. John Gooding, everything came together. That was after winning the title in 93 with my first year with Roush. And then we started Trans Am, and we didn't have a sponsor at the start of the year, but then All Sports signed on, and the rest is history.
So Dan Binks is one of those characters, right? He's how do you describe him? He's like an enigma now, isn't he? He's doing better now than he ever did. He's not with factory Pratt and Miller. You two were probably the perfect Thelma and Louise, or he needed you and you needed him to be able to achieve. Dan Binks obviously being your race engineer, and he was a lot younger then. But did you just identify something in each other that was like, this kid, he said you were very quick and you just wanted to win, right? That was he could just see it from the beginning, and he just wanted to win at all costs.
It took a little bit, because the way that first deal came together, he was with Clayton Cunningham. He was like 2 years older than me. I was 19, he was 21 or 22. And that was his first crew chief deal. And I mean, you think he's intense now. He was really intense then. And so, but I wasn't supposed to be the guy. Mazda wanted an older driver. They were going to go with Bob Reed, who was a national champion, who was a dentist. He had some funding, and so he was going to be their guy. But they needed extra guys at Daytona and Sebring. So I went at Daytona and Sebring, and then they prepped my dad's RX-7 at Miami, I think, and I finished fourth, I think, which was ahead of Reed. But so I was leading the points after Sebring, but after Miami, that's when I said I was the best I'd ever finished in a sprint race. I was fourth, and Binks is like, what was wrong? I said, nothing, man, that was awesome. He's like, it's not going to cut it. And I'm like, okay. Whew. And so that was one of those moments where I had to raise my game. And we were leading the points. Mazda said, we don't want a young driver, but you're leading the points, we'll go 2 more races. So I was still leading the points, and 2 more races. And I won those 2 races, and that's only then did they commit for the rest of the year. And so I wasn't supposed to be the guy, but actually now that I think about it, I forgot about this. A moment where I knew I had Binks's confidence was Reed was still in the picture in the longer races. So we got to Charlotte, and Binks said to me before the race, he goes, at the pit stop, you're not getting out. I said, what do you mean? He goes, just don't get out. I said, he says, we'll handle that. Don't get out of the car.
No shit.
And so I come into the pits, and Reed's there to get in, and I just looked straight ahead. I kept the belt buckled, and we won.
Would it be fair to say that the Tommy Kendall now is a much nicer, more balanced person than he was back then? Nicer being a weird word, but even your brother says, JK said, you were a tough motherfucker back then.
It's not even close. Not even close. I would have slit anyone's throat. I mean, I would have done it. I was nice, and I was I looked the same from the outside because I was always well-spoken, and and was non-confrontational and all these things, but I was, totally different. So
that's an insulation, self-preservation thing too. Almost, yes, you could be like that, but I'm sure psychologists would say, but you were obviously incredibly vulnerable, which is why you made yourself that way, or something, because to be that focused to the exclusion of all else is the mark, but is it sustainable, or did your accident stop that run? I mean, who would you be now if it wasn't for that?
My accident started it, but the thing that really drove my evolution was splitting up with Caroline.
Yeah.
And so I literally had no access to my emotions, none, and it was super helpful.
Is that why? I mean, let's face it. You and I have shared some common ground over the years. Not for the listeners, not that common ground. We've never trodden on the same ground, but we had the same appetites and the same weakness, if you like, for girls and for. Do you think that's the deflection of the lifestyle? You can just disposable. You can.
It was the same. It was the same thing. It was results oriented. It was and ultimately, I call it a knot that only gets tighter.
Yeah.
And I saw it. I don't know Tiger Woods at all, but what happened to him didn't. I almost predicted it because I was kind of close to a situation. My brother worked for that company, and so I know it's basically everything is not enough, and you're hyper successful, and pretty soon it's the results are the drug, and that distracts you from all our human frailties. I'm not good enough, basically, and so and with Caroline, you know her. I mean, you won't meet a more spectacular person, and so when I was cheating like a maniac, and when I finally got caught, it was on my birthday in 1995, and I consider that the best day of my life. Yeah. Which was the least other than my accident, probably the least fun day of my life. But it's when I started waking up, and it unfolded over a period of weeks. But I'm like, I had to ask. I'm like, the first time I'd asked why a little bit before, but I hadn't dug at all. I was too busy, and so. But that's what started me, like, why? I'm the best there is at this, and I'm horrible as a husband. And to be honest, I was an okay brother and friend, but when you're all consumed with what you need, there's not much left for anyone else. And so that started this, this like why, and peeling the onion a little bit. And even that was hard. I was so out of touch with my emotions. I didn't know I was out of touch with my emotions.
That's the worst, right?
Yeah. And so
I don't have a problem.
Yeah, exactly. So the first time we went to a therapist, I just manipulated the therapist and made it think like she's insane,
Yeah.
And so, but I remember the therapist asking me, I think it was probably the first time I was alone. She said, "What makes you mad?" And I'm like, "Nothing." And she's like, "No, really, what makes you mad?" I said, "Nothing. Nothing makes me mad. Zero." I said, when I had my accident, I said I wasn't mad, I wasn't sad, I said, what do I have to do? I said, I was like a machine. I said, and she goes, "No, think about it. Tell me honestly, what makes you mad?" I'm thinking, I said, "Actually, you're starting to irritate me." I said, "Well, you know what? If someone cuts me off or someone cheats on a merge on an on-ramp," I said, "it makes me furious." She goes, "Huh?" She said, "Does that seem like proportional or what?" I said, "No, not really." That was my first glimpse. So because I was so non-confrontational, being mad wasn't allowed per se. So I could be mad at someone I didn't know in another car.
Yeah.
And so, but the anger was how I slowly started getting access to my feelings a little bit and so forth. And then I'm like, okay, why do I have everything and I'm not happy and so forth? So I look pretty similar you can tell I'm happy now, and whereas before it was more of a veneer of celebrating on the podium and so forth.
That's it's kind of a beautiful insight, really, because it does make you feel, I think we all question why we behave the way we behave in certain circumstances. And my journey, it's taken me till now to really get my shit together on that front. But I didn't have a defining moment.
Right.
You had a really big fucking defining moment when your life was sentenced to the accident and Caroline leaving. I was never married that young, but it's sort of like, if it's all there to be taken, why don't you take it all?
If Caroline wasn't who she was, who was incapable of compromising herself and incapable of BSing, which is not the easiest at times. But in this case, she wouldn't. Our life was great. We had lots of material, all this stuff.
Didn't mean anything.
Like unacceptable. And so she caught me. I wasn't really ready to give it up. She said, "Listen, you have one chance. You got one chance, or this is the last you're ever going to see me."
Yeah. And she is the most beautiful woman you'll ever meet.
Yeah. And more than beauty, she, in my accident, you know, and this is when I was doing, she slept next to me in the hotel room and battled with the nurses, taking blood when my blood count was low. I mean, the ultimate partner. And so, but if she wasn't the way she was, I would have spun it around. I would have, which is what I was trying to do. I was trying to dance and so forth. And I finally just surrendered. I said, okay. And my life just changed trajectory. And I still had to figure a lot of stuff out, which I'm thankfully I'm good at figuring things out.
Yeah.
And so I just kept asking why. And so, I mean, this is something that will help everyone listening. I believe how hard we are on ourselves, and that comes from a whole bunch of different things, but that is what drives most of our self-destructive behavior, and it comes out differently in different people. But the being too, and it also fuels us. That's a lot of guys I talk this through with, they don't want to lose the edge that fuels them, and so they're like, I'm not going to go that far. And so it's interesting, but I'm of the opinion that and so it's a totally different operating system that and so the self-criticism and never living up to your setting your goals and kicking the goals further and further out and never you know, it's you can't ever get there. While we're on this, I remember hearing the saying, it's about the journey, not the destination, when I was younger. And when I was racing, I'm like, not only is that not right, that is 180 degrees wrong. I said, I have no interest in the journey. I want to get there as fast as I can, and I want to win.
Yeah.
And I said, that's idiotic.
Yeah. Well, who would have that?
Well, that is the person that's heading where I was heading. That's how you think.
Yeah.
And so now you can actually, I believe, operate at a higher level the way I am now. It's harder to motivate because you're not afraid. Your fears go away. You're not driven by fear and anger. So it's harder to be as engaged or as focused, but you're not susceptible to pressure. You're not, because it's enjoyment. You're enjoying the actual part of the journey, not just, and ironically, you still get to better destinations that way.
My mum said those very words to me 10 years ago. She lives in Africa, as you know, travels. And she's like, you don't even know where you don't really know where you're headed, and you're not enjoying the journey. You know, she's like, today could be the best day you've had. I tell my kids that. We don't know, this could be the best day. Sitting here with the chicken car could be as good as it's gonna get. We just don't know. By the way, that is famous chicken, El Gallo behind, looking pretty magnificent. How many people have driven a car with a chicken head around Talladega? Not many, right?
Only two, and it was that one. It was myself and Brian Vickers, who was on the other end of the bet that led me to Talladega.
Really? So what happened? What was the bet?
The bet was actually on a bowling game for the LA, you know, when NASCAR was here for a press tour, and we went to a bowling alley, and so we're bowling and bowled a couple games, and similar to how I did with Danica, Brian said, let's have a bet. And I said, do we want a stupid bet like someone has to buy dinner, or do we want a bet that matters? And he
That's
says,
a challenge in itself.
And so he goes, oh, no, bet that matters. I said, okay. I said, thought about it, and I said, all right, there was 3 to a team. Losers have to get hair extensions put in their hair in the shape of a mullet. No wigs, nothing temporary, like legit glued in or clamped in hair extension mullet. And
slightly disturbing your mind went there in the first place.
It took me a second, but and so Brian turned into a phenomenal bowler all of a sudden in the game that mattered, and so we lost. And so that was so I was envisioning him racing a cup weekend with a mullet. and of course it got flipped. And so, and he keeps track of all of his bets. And so a few months went by, and he calls me and says, "Hey, you owe me a bet." And I said, "Oh, you're right." He said, "Look at my schedule." And so Talladega was open weekend. My little brother was also on the team. He had to pay it, and Don Rohr, who was his marketing guy. And so I tell my brother we're going to Talladega, and he calls me back. He says, "That's Halloween weekend." He says, "We got to take the car." And I'm like, "You're right." So we made plans. Actually, this car wasn't even together yet because the old one got crashed, and I had the new car, but I hadn't put the bits on. It wasn't. So we full speed ahead. We were going to ship it. The shipper no-showed us, and we ended up driving all the way to Talladega, which, talk about the best days. That was the best thing that ever happened, the shipper no-showing us.
Yeah.
And my brother was panicked. He's like, "What do we do? What do we do?" I said, "Have you called him?" He said, "Yeah, I've been calling him." I said, "Well, if he doesn't respond by Saturday, we'll just drive." He says, "To Talladega?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Will it make it?" "No idea." I said, I don't have to be anywhere for 4 months, and you don't have a job, so let's
go.
Going. And
was the reception amazing when you got there?
This was early Facebook, and I had an idea that you could tell stories and get people to follow, and that was kind of proof of concept about almost like a show of sorts. And we got there, and it just kept snowballing. Then we were on the pre-show with him, and they taped us. We got on the track, which doesn't happen. So
that's pretty wild. The Danica one is special, though.
Yeah, I mean it's immortalized, right?
Yeah.
You got to set the scene. This was 2002. I retired in '97 after my best season. I was going to be in the booth for Fox for the Indy cars, or car, whatever it was, Champ Car then. And Danica, no one knew who she was. And so when I got the call from Toyota to do the race, I was still competitive, so I'm like, "Who are the pros?" And so they told me, and I'm like, I'm not too worried about that. And they said Danica Patrick. I'm like, And I knew of her because I knew she had finished second at the festival in England. And the only other American, the best finish ever by an American, was Danny Sullivan in '77, which was second. We've won it since, but back then. And so I'm like, you can't fake that. And so I still think I stack up against anyone. So I'm like, so she's got the goods at least. But I said, my only question is, how big is she? Because if she's tiny, I said, in a car with 180 horsepower, I said, so that was my only concern. And so,
and of course she was tiny.
We get to Willow Springs for the training where you meet the celebs, you spend time with them, and I get out there, it's a cold day, I get there, there's a big Land Cruiser, Keith Crane is in the race, he's in this Land Cruiser with this pretty girl that I assume is his daughter, and I'm like, I'm gonna go warm up in Keith's car, I'm gonna say hello, I'm gonna meet his daughter, and I get in the car and I introduce myself, and I get the famous Danica Patrick vice grip handshake, and she says, "Hi, I'm Danica." I'm like, oh. And I can see she's tiny. I'm like, okay, here we go. And so her career had kind of died out. She was supposed to, she did tested with Milner and it didn't go anywhere. And so practice, I was quicker than her. First practice at Long Beach, I'm quicker, but I get up speed right like this, and then she's just getting closer and closer and closer. And qualifying, she's a hair quicker. And so right before the race, in the driver's meeting, and it's a fun event, but you're still
trying to do your thing.
You're doing your thing, and so the pros aren't that much buddies. You're buddies with all the celebs, and but the pros, some of them are sizing each other up. So I say to Danica, I said, "Hey Danica," I said, "what do you say we have a side bet on this race to put some teeth in this?" And she says, "Okay, what do you have in mind?" And I had thought about this a little bit, and so I said, loser gets led on a leash through the IndyCar pit lane on tomorrow morning. And she goes, "You're on." And so, and I'm saying, I gotta beat her to turn one, because where it was most dramatic was accelerating off the hairpin. It was like 10 car lengths. And so, so I said, I gotta beat her to turn one. If I get in front of her, there's no way she's getting past me. And I did not beat her to turn one. And so the race is unfolding, and I'm close, and then all of a sudden she made a few mistakes on one lap, and I got up close, and she was a little bit rattled, and the left-hander before the right out of the back straightaway. And so I get up on her left, and we're coming back to set up, but I'm on the wrong side of her, and she's coming over, and we start to get together, and I'm about to hook her into the fence. And to this day, I don't know why I did it, but I lifted, which I never did. And I let her off the hook, and she gathered it up, and she didn't make any more mistakes. I couldn't get around her. And I don't know if it's like don't hit a girl. That's the only thing I can think of. I just couldn't wreck her like that. And so we go to the banquet that night. Everyone lets their hair down. It's a super fun banquet. There's a roast basically, and the celebs. It's awesome. And so now we're bonded. We're having fun. Next morning, I don't know if she said it that night. I think in the morning. So we meet there. I said, I'll see you in the morning. So we get there, and she says, you don't have to do this. And I had the props. I had the studded collar and the leash, and she said, you don't have to do this. I don't want to humiliate you. I said, no, deal's a deal. And if you had lost, you'd be doing it in a Catwoman suit. I had a Catwoman suit, like a rubber Catwoman suit for her.
Hopefully you didn't wear it.
I did not wear that. She didn't know about that, but she would have if she had lost. This will be good for you. Anyway, so that was the bet. And
the rest is history. Everyone loves seeing it. Long Beach has lost something without that celebrity race.
Big time.
In a big time. I don't know if anyone could ever bring it back, but think of the Adam Carolla and Patrick Dempsey. I mean, so many people got into racing as a result of that.
That's where I met Patrick Dempsey.
Yeah.
I'm in, I forget, Mums it was called then, a place where everyone had dinner, and it was his first year doing the celeb race, done no racing. I'm there talking to some people, and someone comes up and taps me on the shoulder. I turn around and it's Patrick Dempsey. He says, hey, sorry to interrupt. I said, I just want to introduce myself. I'm a huge fan of your show. I love it. I'm thinking, someone's messing Patrick Dempsey. I said, I'm looking over his shoulder like, oh yeah, that's really, yeah. And I realized he's dead serious. He loved my show on Speed Channel, and but what was cool is they make you go to the training. So the camaraderie, if that wasn't there, you'd just show up for the sessions and you'd never bond. And so Toyota did that. Was super cool. You'd spend a couple days at Willow, and you'd start to get, and you'd help them, and that was the coolest. That race was really, really awesome. So.
Yeah. Have you enjoyed the TV thing the whole way through?
I have.
Because you were a bit like me. We were the risk takers in it. Yeah. No one knew what we were going to say, and I think that was the joy of it. But you got really good at it. You obviously really enjoyed it.
It's funny because when I left racing and I took some time off and so forth, without making a long story, I kind of said I was burnt out. Roush was super successful, but it wasn't a great environment in some ways. And so I kind of, when I was apart, I said, listen, I don't want to work for anyone I don't like. I don't want to do anything I don't want to do. And those are my rules going forward. And that's a decent recipe for never working again. Yeah. And so all of the stuff that has happened to me since then, my career was a study in leaving no stone unturned, nothing to chance that you could, to not trying to do anything. Literally everything that happened fell in my lap. And so, and there was a part where early on, when I really didn't care at all, I just let it rip. And so once I knew I enjoyed it, that was the hard thing, is how can you maintain that when you do care? And Test Drive was an awesome, and the commentating I loved. And it's funny, it's hard to remember what it was like when I started, but nobody spoke that way. Nobody let it rip back then.
No.
And I had a sense that people were ready for this, and it wasn't outrageous, but it was different than anyone else had done. And people ate it up, they wanted more of that, realness. And so the hard part, and so I was just lucky. And then Test Drive, I get this call and they explain it, like, I said, no one's gonna watch that. Who wants to watch that? And the first episode was Jimmy Vassar and I, and we had so much, it's like we forgot we were filming. And so I've not needing to do it, not trying to do it, is really helpful in that regard. To be honest, I did need some income, but I was committed to not doing anything I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
But
it's good enough.
Really,
and then it led to what we do, and
yep.
A lot of opportunity. Well, we're nearly people's appetite is about an hour and a half of us dribbling on. But when you think about drive, when we were just talking and we get to go and do things out at racetracks and stuff, there is still something magical about driving a car fast.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It's just, and I don't know about you, but if I don't do it at least once a year, but if you can do it more than that, it with no pressure, just the beauty of being able to drive a car fast on a track when there's no lap times. We want to know the lap times. That's the funny thing, but there's no end game for it. Maybe in a way it's back to full circle because you can just enjoy driving. Is that still something that you?
100%. And it really is when you're a kid. It's the only thing you can relate it to. You're just so in awe of doing it. You're trying to get better, and you are shooting, but just the being turned loose in a car. It's the only thing that's close. Yeah. Now the better part is you have this skill close to mastered. Yeah. And so really enjoying back to what Paul Newman said, the art of it. Yeah. And just everything that's perfect, that's unlike anything else. I can see why these celebrities are drawn to this. Think about, and I said this to a few people that are in a racing movie, they didn't race. They're pretending. The finished product is, oh my God. But when they do a car chase or a shootout, they're not doing those things. Yeah. And so there isn't the thrill. It looks like it to the viewer when it's done. So when they get and do the real thing, which is a whole, like a car chase, is shot over 2 weeks, one corner at a time. Yeah. And this is all strung together, just letting it rip. No wonder they love it. There's literally nothing like it.
I will ask this question. The conversation that I hear you have most over the last 4 years doing the talk show with other people, if it's not directly about your racing, people come to you and gravitate to you as well for what you do with this, in finance and stock market, and you're following the markets. It's interesting because I mean you talked about the NASCAR driver that was also, I know, is very big into that. Your friend, we just talked about
Brian Vickers.
Vickers, yeah. Big into that sort of thing. But why do you think why are you so dedicated? I mean, it's great way of earning a living, but what is it about your personality that suits that? Because it's not, my brain doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Well,
and you obviously love it.
I love it. And I've been studying it. My degree was economics, but so there's a part of, I like business, but investing is owning a piece of a bunch of businesses, actually. And then it's a little bit like gambling, but where with much, 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 much better odds. Yeah. And so much like racing, if you really dig in and you really study it, the odds are dramatically in your favor. And so it's a job no one can take from you. Yeah. Is something you can do from home. But I do love, and I'm not as good at investing as I was at racing. It's literally one of the best there is. Yeah. I'm getting I'm quite good. And I'm still getting, so the part of learning a craft and getting better and better, and it's like racing where you never totally master it, Mm-hmm. So I love that aspect of it. But the reality is when you're right, you get paid. Yeah, so everybody who argues on Twitter, you don't get paid when you're right there. No. I said here, I'm like, if you figure something out that nobody else has, and so that's where I look, is I'm trying to understand where conventional wisdom is wrong. Yeah. That's what yielded the biggest payoffs in racing. It's what yields the biggest payoffs in investing as well. So I love it.
What was the best piece of advice anyone gave you?
Best piece of advice?
You've already said Newman said some stuff, but anything that resonates with you all these years later?
Huh. Well, my dad gave me a poem. He gave, when he and my mother were splitting up, he gave us he had it bound in a little book, Rudyard Kipling's If, and gave us each of that, and it's in my backpack.
No way.
And I carry it with me everywhere, and I read it all the time. And I remember when I first read it, I didn't know, none of it made sense to me. It was a little bit like the journey it's about the journey, not the destination. And I read it over and over, and now there's so much wisdom in that. So that poem from my dad,
Wow.
It's the closest I've come to getting a tattoo, and a little if somewhere, and it would have meaning because all my brothers got a copy of it, and it's also from my dad.
Wow. DK, this was great. Thank you for doing it. We're going to go and take a picture with the chicken car now. It is amazing that you're known for the size of your cock. Roll. What more can we say? Hey, dude, thank you. I loved it. Thank you so much.
I don't know if you edit these in terms of like Binks. I would like to expound on Binks a little bit.
Well, we should.
Yeah. Okay. Should we
We
wait
don't
till
even.
that stops?
No, I don't even edit it. I'll just add that in. Tell me more. I was actually literally, as I was saying goodbye, I was thinking we need to say a bit more about Binks. Yeah.
I mean, with you said it well. We were both better because of the other, and we each unlocked. But I mean, he's one of a kind, and I recognized it not immediately, but pretty early on. And so as soon as when I signed with Chevrolet, the first thing I thought of was I got to get Binks here, and in every move I made, that was the second thing I did, was to try to figure out how to get Binks there, and so I mean, getting a kid that grew up in San Diego to move to Brighton, Michigan, I'm like, that's a tough one. Well, my ace in the hole, his girlfriend, who became his wife, Sherry, is from Brighton, Michigan.
No way.
So, but he's just, I mean, he's the greatest of all time. I think in not just the results, anyone who's around him at the speed at which he works, he's to this day, I got my fill long ago. He still doesn't have his fill. He's just, he has to, and similar, I guess I'm getting with the investing, he still loves to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
How do I make this better? And he's relentless. He will not, like the stuff he's doing now with these midget engines and so forth, some things that they just have lived with that are just, this is just how a midget engine is. He's like, no, there's got to be a way. And so he's got a heart of gold. He likes teaching people, but if you're not in it all in, he has no time for you, so that won't last long. But if you want to learn, you can learn from the guy. He'd do anything for you. He's just, I mean, my life and my career would have been dramatically different without him. So it's really, truly a win-win.
All right, DK. Thank you very much.
You bet.
That's great. I'm glad that we could do this decades before your demise, so we can do another one. Okay.
Well, kudos to you. This is you say, we need to talk to, but this doesn't happen by itself, and you got to work at this, and you've always been a hustler and a getter-doner.
Well, we're getting it done. Less of the getter done these days, more get one done. But you know what? Still hustling. That's funny.